Hello everyone and welcome back to GameFlix Max, where today marks the beginning of a new era. Again. This video is going to be my biggest and longest video yet. So get ready because today you guys are getting the first of many video game review videos. The ultimate Last of Us review. This video will include not only one review, but a grand total of 7 reviews. Because in honor of the new Last of Us show, which now all episodes are out and you should go watch them all, they are very good, I'm going to be reviewing every single piece of content in the Last of Us series. That includes The Last of Us, The Last of Us Left Behind, The Last of Us Part 2, The Last of Us Part 1, The Last of Us Part 1 Left Behind, and finally the TV show. I will also be giving a review rating for the series as a whole. Now, before we get into each of the individual games, I need to explain my system of ranking. So, each game will be ranked based on 5 different criteria, which will each weigh different, as in each will contribute either more or less to the final result. Then I will take the average of these rankings of the criteria, taking into account of their weights, and that will be the final rating. All ratings will be 1 through 10. Here's my scale of thought when I am ranking these. So 1 to 2 out of 10 is absolute garbage and it is beyond fixing. 3 to 4 out of 10 is it needs a lot of improving but isn't totally beyond saving. 5 out of 10 is mediocre. 6 out of 10 is decent, which is not the same as mediocre because when I think of mediocre, I think of an even amount of bad and good elements, but when I think of decent, I think a lot of bad elements, but still more good than bad. Anyway, 7 to 8 out of 10 is good, just good, nothing more, but also nothing less. 9 out of 10 is very good, just has maybe a few little issues, but nothing that makes the game bad. And 10 out of 10 is perfect, absolutely nothing wrong with it at all, or the things that are wrong with it are so insignificant that they don't matter. Okay, so the 5 criteria and their weights are: 1. The part of a video game that separates it from other types of media. Gameplay, which is worth 40% of the final ranking. Then the story, which is another important part, but I personally value gameplay over story when it comes to video games, mainly because if I wanted a good story, I would have read a book or watched a TV show or movie. Story is worth 30% of the final ranking. Replayability, what it is right in the name, 15% of the final ranking. Then art design, which is not the same as graphics. Art design is how they design the setting and characters and stuff like that, and is worth 10% of the final ranking. And then finally, graphics is the last criteria. While graphics can make a game visually stunning, it doesn't make or break a game. 5% of the final ranking. Okay, so now that I am done explaining all of that, let's finally get into the game and the TV show. Oh yeah, and I just wanted to add that this video is chopped up into chapters, so if you only want to watch the review for a specific item, it is already separated up for you. Okay, now enjoy. Okay, so starting out here, we have the review for the game that started the whole franchise. The original Last of Us game. Okay, technically, it is The Last of Us Remastered, but they're pretty much exactly the same game besides slightly improved graphics and some new dialogue. But at its core, they are pretty much the same game. And I'm talking about the first Last of Us game and The Last of Us Remastered. Okay, now let's start with the criteria that I think is going to get the worst rating out of all of them, and that is gameplay. When reviewing a game, I value gameplay above all else, like I said earlier in the video, because it's the only thing that separates a video game from just straight up movies and TV shows. And the gameplay in this game is Okay, let me explain. At the end of the day, The Last of Us is a story game, right? Through and through. Meaning that the game devs, the game developers, were looking for the player to have more of a cinematic experience rather than a gaming experience. Don't get me wrong, that is perfectly fine. But at the end of the day, The Last of Us is still a video game, so I must treat it as such. So I wouldn't consider the gameplay bad by any means, but it is simplistic. At the end of the day, though, it's Naughty Dog. All of their games have very simplistic gameplay. Of the two game franchises that I've played of Naughty Dog, which is just Uncharted and The Last of Us. So I guess I actually can't really speak too heavily on that, but I don't know how many other games Naughty Dog has. So you may be asking right now, what do you mean by simplistic? And to that, I answer that the gameplay is extremely straightforward, and I feel like a big chunk of the game is just like a walking simulator, from cutscene to cutscene. Then when it isn't a walking simulator, you are just simply fighting some enemies, are usually extremely predictable. The combat in the game doesn't leave a lot of room for like creativity and is usually just pretty straightforward. Then, unlike Uncharted, another Naughty Dog game, there are no real puzzles. It really just requires you to like walk around and find your way if you're stuck. You basically just shoot people. Maybe throw, a couple of nail bombs and you're good. Okay. Now, don't even get me started on the sneaking in this game, the sneak system. The sneaking in this game is horrendous. For some reason, it seems like the enemies come like straight at you, even if you haven't if they haven't even, if they don't even know you're even there. They're just like, oh, I wonder what's over here. Oh, it's Joel. And also, sometimes when you can't get up and walk behind them because then they'll hear you. So you have to crouch, but crouching is too slow. And sometimes they just randomly, like to be crazy and turn around, which makes it extremely hard to sneak. Then also, if one person spots you, then all of a sudden, even if they don't say anything to all the other people, you are spotted. Everyone else is going to be on top of your ass. And it's definitely the most annoying part of the game, for me personally. Okay, so yes, I have said a lot of negative things about the gameplay. But now I'm going to tell you something that I like. That is the crafting and the pill system they have in the game. Finding materials to make bombs and med kits, and finding scraps to upgrade your guns and pills, you upgrade your ability. It adds it makes the walking simulator part of the game feel like it has actual meaning. But still, there are not enough of said scraps or pills because I wasn't even close to completing all of the upgrades. Maybe if I used the shivs to open all the doors, but I was very very timid about using my shivs because I was worried that I would run into a clicker level, and then I need the shivs to kill the clicker sneakily. But yeah, they need to add more stuff in this game. Okay, so with all that said, my final rating for the gameplay of the first Last of Us game, and again, technically Last of Us Remastered, but it's the same game, is a 7.5 out of 10. It's not horrible, but it also is nothing to hoot about. Okay, now we are going to be talking about the criteria that carries The Last of Us on its back and is also the reason why it is one of my favorite games. That's right, you guessed it, the story. The story of The Last of Us is as good as people make it out to be. I honestly have a hard time thinking of anything bad to say about it. It keeps you wanting more and gives you a reason. It gives you a reason to play through the mediocre gameplay. That being said, I do have one complaint. Also, I said this at the beginning of the video, but there are minor spoilers ahead, so skip to this timestamp on the screen if you want to skip to the rating of the story and not hear any spoilers. So now that all the people that don't want spoilers are gone, the real boys are here. Okay, so the one complaint I have is that they never give a good reason why Joel lied to Ellie at the end of the game. I feel like it would have been better if he just told her like a version of the truth. Like he told what he said is he was like, "Oh yeah, there's so many other people that were immune. They didn't have a cure." And I was like, that's so unbelievable. You could have just said that raiders like attacked the building and you had to get her out of there. And that would have been more believable and you probably wouldn't have been caught and the whole entire plot of The Last of Us Part 2 would still be a thing, but Ellie wouldn't hate you. But he could have just straight up told her that he could have just straight up told her the truth and it probably would have been fine. Like that they were going to kill her without giving her a choice or something along those lines. I feel like she would understand. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. But I think they should have made it so Joel told the truth. Though overall, it's just a very heartfelt story about a man and this girl bonding and becoming sort of a father-daughter team. Then another thing about this story is all of the very good side characters. They have a lot of really good side characters. Like Tess, Bill, Tommy, Henry, and Sam. Those are pretty much all of them. There's a couple more. But they really let you attach to these characters even if they are only with you for like a short while. Which I kind of like because it feels like you're progressing, you know? And it feels like more time has passed because it's like, oh yeah, we were with this guy and now we're in a whole different area. Okay, so now the final thing I want to talk about is the dialogue between Ellie and Joel while you are walking. Just like collecting and crafting different things, another thing that keeps these walking spells interesting is the small, insignificant conversations between Joel and Ellie. It just helps solidify the chemistry that Joel and Ellie have and why they are like a really good. So with all of that said, my final rating for The Last of Us story is a 10 out of 10. Despite that one complaint I had, I still think it's a 10 out of 10 story. Practically perfect. 10 out of 10. Okay, now we're on to the replayability of the Last of Us game. Now, this is where it starts to... We got all the big criteria out of the way. Now let's talk about replayability. Okay, there isn't much to say, really, about the replayability in this game. The replayability is great with this game for the same reason why you would watch your favorite movie over and over again. The story is just so fucking good. It is one of those stories that you wouldn't mind experiencing over again. The gameplay, though, doesn't make me want to replay it all too much. Actually, it doesn't really make me want to replay it at all. When I replay this game, it's for the story and nothing else. But like I said before, the story literally carries the whole entire game on its back. So, yeah. Though, I do have to give credit where credit is due, even if it is bad credit. The gameplay does bring down the replayability a bit. I can't, in good conscience, give the replayability of this game a 10 out of 10. Strictly because of the gameplay. So I'm going to give the replayability of this game a 9 out of 10. Because the story is just so good, but the gameplay is lacking. Now it's time for everybody's favorite criteria. And also the second to last criteria on the list. And this one also isn't as important, and the criteria is art design. Okay, this is real simple. The art design in this game is absolutely stunning. If you can just take a second to take in the world around you, you can see all of the little details that they put into this game. All of the overgrowth that is all over the place, and the rundown shops and cars and such. It all really just helps to signify that this is a post-apocalyptic game. Also, the character design is really good as well. All of the little details in the characters' faces and clothes just add so much to the experience and so much to their characters in general. I really don't have anything bad to say about the art design of this game. 10 out of 10. Okay, so now for the graphics. Personal opinion, I do not value graphics that high at all. Like, don't get me wrong, it's really cool when a game has really good graphics, but it's not the most important part of a game by a long shot. So, but right now, before I get into it, I want to make it clear that I'm ranking these graphics by 2014 standards, which is when the remastered Last of Us came out, and not 2023's. Because obviously, by 2023 standards, the graphics are shit in this game. But by 2014 standards, they're actually pretty good. If you look at other really big games that came out in 2013, 2014, you can tell just how good these graphics are. The two games that I compared to The Last of Us graphics-wise were GTA 5 and Assassin's Creed Unity. The graphics in this game are way better than GTA 5's graphics, and GTA just came out like a year before this game. But I do think that Assassin's Creed Unity's graphics are better than The Last of Us Remastered's graphics. So, by that reasoning, they weren't the best when it came to graphics during that time period, but they also certainly weren't the worst. And that is why I'm giving the graphics of this game a harsh rating of 7 out of 10, because I really don't feel comfortable giving it anything higher than that. But again, like I said at the beginning of the video, graphics don't really count too much towards the final rating. And speaking of final rating, okay, before I say the final rating of The Last of Us, I am just going to quickly recap all of the rankings I gave for each criteria. So gameplay, I gave 7.5 out of 10. Story, I gave 10 out of 10. Replayability, I gave 9 out of 10. Art design, I gave 10 out of 10. And finally, graphics, I gave 7 out of 10. So taking into account all of the ratings and the weights that they entail, my final rating for The Last of Us is an 8.7 out of 10. I know a lot of people will probably think it deserves higher because of the story, but at the end of the day, it is a video game, not a movie, and the gameplay just really wasn't doing it for me. Okay, next up we will be talking about the DLC that came with the remastered game of The Last of Us, and that is the Left Behind DLC. Okay, starting out with the gameplay, it is actually more different than you would think from the first, from the main game. I got introduced to stalkers in this DLC, which apparently, the stalkers' whole deal is that they just kind of run towards you at full speed, no matter what. Anyways, like I was saying, the gameplay is actually more different than the main game than you might realize. But hold your horses. I didn't say it was different in a good way. It is different in both good and bad ways. Let's start with the bad ways. First of all, this DLC feels even more like a walking simulator than the main game, especially during the parts where you are playing as younger Ellie. I guess technically, that is how time works, so she was younger. Where you're walking through the mall with Riley. There are no items for you to collect because you can't craft anything. You don't even have a goddamn gun. It's literally a walking simulator. Okay, so putting that aside though, now let's talk about future Ellie. Yes, there are items for you to pick up and you can craft things, but there aren't that many items, so you are limited on what you can craft. Also, there are no pills, and instead of giving you the best stats by default, they give you the worst stats by default. I can't even make this shit up. Also, all of the different encounters in the game feel extremely easy, easier than the first game. And I think I only died once to a stalker because I didn't know what the fuck a stalker was, and I didn't know what I was supposed to do. There weren't as many enemies per encounter, and there was a lot of encounters where there were just both humans and infected. Or I guess infected are humans, just both like people and infected. And during those, you just had to lure the infected towards the people, and they would just kill each other. Then you just had to clean up the mess. Now let's talk about the one thing that I think is better about the DLC than the main game, and that is Ellie's stealth kills. Because if you remember in the main game, there's that one part you play as Ellie. It's like the winter time. And when you sneak up behind someone, it takes forever for Ellie to stealth kill someone. She has a knife, and it takes forever. She like jumps on them and stabs them like 3 times in the neck, and it takes so long. I don't understand. But in the DLC, they reduced that time significantly, making it much easier to use stealth as Ellie. Which is good because you only play as Ellie in this. But with all of that said, my final rating for the Left Behind DLC's gameplay is actually less than the main game at a 7 out of 10, because even with the improved stealth kills with Ellie, it is still worse than the first game, or the main game. Okay, now we're talking about the story of Left Behind. Just like with the first game, if you don't want spoilers and you just want to hear the rating for the story, go to this timestamp. The story of Left Behind is pretty good. It is pretty much your standard DLC story where it covers a certain period of time in between cuts in the main game. Though there is a prequel side of it as well, which I do like, which is the story of the night Ellie got bit, and it's actually pretty good, but not up to the same standards as the main game. First of all, there are a lot of cringy, uncomfortable moments in this part. But an example of this is when they are in the photo booth together and they are just like right in your face. As the player, they are just right in your face making like these silly pictures. Basically, you have the camera's POV and they're just looking at you making poses, and it was really uncomfortable for me to play. But besides that, it was a cute little love story between these two girls. It was just some really sweet, but at the same time tragic backstory into Ellie's past. One quick note though, Riley is the most boring character in the entire series. Oh my god. Get a personality. Really. You're fucking... okay. You know what? I'm moving on. So for all of those reasons, I give the story of Left Behind a 9 out of 10. The only reason that it isn't getting a 10 out of 10 is because it isn't as good as the first game. And Riley is the most boring character. And all of those uncomfortable cringe moments. Okay, so the fact that this is a DLC sets the replayability down some for me. The reason for this is because usually I would rather just replay the main game than the DLC. Also, the gameplay in this game is very mediocre. I still wouldn't consider it bad, but I would consider it worse than the main game. The story is also slightly worse than the main game as well, especially with boring Riley. And for all of those reasons, I give the replayability rating a 4 out of 10. Most people would probably just want to replay the main game, and fuck you if you think differently. There's nothing much to say about the art design in this game because it's pretty much the same as the first game, 10 out of 10. Okay, again, same as art design, the graphics neither improved nor decreased in quality from the main game, 7 out of 10. Okay, so now for the final rating. Just to sum up, gameplay 7 out of 10, story 9 out of 10, replayability 4 out of 10, art design 10 out of 10, and graphics 7 out of 10. Making it so that the final rating for The Last of Us Left Behind DLC, a 7.45 out of 10. Not the best rating in the world, but certainly not that bad. It all really just comes down to the gameplay. So now we are at probably one of the most controversial games in the Last of Us series, out of the 2 games in the DLC. And that is The Last of Us Part Dos. I'm just kidding, I don't speak Spanish, it's just Part 2. It seems that there is no in between with this game. It seems that people either love this game or they hate it. Okay, now let's talk about the gameplay. Now, if you couldn't tell already, I'm not the biggest fan of The Last of Us Part 2, but that is mainly because of the story. Though as far as gameplay goes, I have to give credit where credit is due. They did improve a lot of aspects of the first game that I thought were lacking. But at the same time, there was a lot of things that still need improving. So let's first start with all the things wrong with the gameplay of The Last of Us Part 2. One of the most annoying things about The Last of Us Part 2 is the overbearance of enemies in different levels, especially the infected levels. The levels where you are fighting people actually aren't that bad and usually provide a challenge without being too tedious. But that is different with the infected levels. The infected are more difficult to fight than people because they are more aggressive and some of them cannot be meleeed. That is why there weren't that many infected levels in the first game. And when there was, it wasn't that overbearing or tedious. But I liked how many infected levels there were in the first Last of Us game. But in the community as a whole, one of the biggest complaints about the first game is that there weren't enough infected levels. Well, The Last of Us Part 2 has the opposite problem. They have way too many infected levels. And then on top of there being too many levels, within the levels there are too many infected. Most infected levels have multiple sections to them within the level. In each section, there are a bunch of infected and that is fine. But there are way too many sections. You finish section after section, and there are still more, even though it feels like it should be done. This makes the game tedious and hard to play. I don't like it. It's not hard like Dark Souls. I mean hard on my mental health. Mentally, I had a hard time playing through this game. But as far as complaints go, that is where they stop. The rest of the gameplay is actually a very huge improvement from the first game. First thing is the HUD. It is much cleaner, in my opinion, easier to navigate. They added a bunch of mechanics and they also added a bunch of mechanics that make the game feel more realistic. And I'm going to list them all right now. Okay, so first, they added a thing where you can slip through narrow surfaces, do a little shimmy through them. I don't know, like this. They do a little shimmy through them, and it helps make the game seem more realistic because in the first game, there were places that you probably could have sneaked around in real life that they wouldn't let you sneak around in that game. And then one of my favorite features that they added is a feature where you can dodge when enemies try to melee attack you, which I thought made the game way more enjoyable. Then also they added proning, which again added more movement in the game, which added to the immersion that I am in this world. I am Ellie. I am the bitch. I'm not calling Ellie a bitch. I'm calling Abby a bitch. They also added a feature where you can hide from enemies in tall grass, which makes stealth way easier than the first game. Also, going prone makes it so you can hide underneath they add some objects that you can only hide going prone, which also greatly improves the stealth. Then they also made it so that the gameplay feels so much smoother than the first game. Then another thing that I like is that they added a lot of accessibility options. You may have noticed in the gameplay in the foreground while I'm talking about this that I have been using lock on aim. And that is because I am bad at video games and I suck at shooting games with controller. And I know it sounds like I'm just making excuses for myself, and that is because I am. Fuck you. I enjoyed the game more with lock on game aim, so screw you. Also, I love the feature where you can break down windows because, like, shatter windows because it makes you think before entering a building. Because, like, if there's infected inside there, they're gonna hear you if you knock down the window. Then another thing that I really enjoyed is that they changed up the whole like supplement system. So there are like specific skill sections you can unlock, and there's like a way more variety of upgrades, and it makes you like think more before purchasing one. Then my favorite thing that they improved in this game from the last game is that there are more supplies, scraps, and supplements. That means you can actually like almost upgrade your weapons and your own abilities completely. Okay, and then one more quick complaint is that when you switch to Abby, it is really annoying that you have to start completely from scratch when it comes to like collecting stuff and upgrades and stuff. But Abby's weapons are pretty good and are different from Ellie's, so I can overlook this a little bit. Also, her abilities and upgrades are different as well. Okay, I'm sorry that this first part went very long, but I was actually very impressed with the upgrades that they made, and I wanted to give this an 8.5 out of 10, but because of the tedious infected levels, I have to bring it down to an 8 out of 10. But still, a big improvement. And the gameplay I would actually consider above mediocre. I think it was pretty good. Okay, now I have to talk about probably one of the most controversial things about this game, and that's the story. Okay, so it seems that with the story of this game, people either love it or they hate it. I am one of the people that are leaning more towards hate than love. Also, spoiler warning, skip to this timestamp, you know the drill. I did not enjoy the story of The Last of Us Part 2. First of all, Joel's death was way too early in the game and anticlimactic as fuck. Actually, all of the major deaths in this game are anticlimactic. Joel's is actually probably the most climactic. Jesse, who is actually a decent character, gets the Lenny treatment from Red Dead Redemption 2. You are just running, and then all of a sudden, you're just like running, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Jesse gets shot in the head and is instantly dead. I'm a poet, and I didn't even know that I was speaking in rhymes. Joel's death is probably the most climactic death in the entire game, like I said before, but that they didn't give like any hint that it was coming. Joel's death was very jarring and shocking and didn't inspire a lot of emotion at first. I was literally, when he died, I was in a state of shock because I did not see it coming. Okay, and that is another thing I hate about this game. That the pacing in this game is it's horrible. It makes it very jarring and shocking. It feels like you're going from like just one thing to another. It feels like an 8-year-old wrote this. Like, okay, then this happened, and then this happens, and then the end. And I'm only exaggerating a little bit. It just feels like so many big things are just happening, one right after the other, and it doesn't give the player time to process. Also, they completely ruined Ellie's character from the first game. In the first game, Ellie is sarcastic and witty, but in this game, she seems just like broody and like a grunt. I guess it makes sense because Joel's death really had like a huge emotional impact on her, but even before Joel's death, she was like this. Now, there's another argument to be said that she's acting all broody and stuff because of all the things that happened between her and Joel regarding the big secret. But for the beginning of the game, she isn't even with Joel. She is just with her friends. So I don't know why she's such a bum. Then I don't even need to talk about the extremely disappointing ending. But I'm going to talk about it. In fact, the ending is so incredibly stupid that I don't even want to talk about it. So forget that. I'm not going to talk about it. Then also, it was a very bold move for them to make Abby the person who killed one of the most beloved characters of all video games, a protagonist. And that's not all. She's also an antagonist. Believe it or not, it's not one of those like redemption stories where like a villain like learns the errors of their ways and becomes good. She's literally both a protagonist and an antagonist at the exact same time. Because she's the protagonist of her own story when you play as her, and she's the antagonist of Ellie's story. So they didn't really do a very good job on Abby's story, because it just feels so rushed, like the whole other parts of the game. This game feels like two games in one. They should have made this game into two separate games. It's freaking ridiculous. Things kind of just happen with Abby, and we don't get any real reason why. Okay, so now that I got that out of the way, let's talk about the most annoying thing about The Last of Us Part 2 story. You thought I was done? No. I could talk about how bad this story is all fucking day, son. So if you don't know a lot about English because you're an idiot, dramatic irony is when like a reader / player / viewer of a story knows something that the characters don't. This is fine. I personally am not that big of a fan of it in like novels and stuff, but it's fine. You can still have a good story with dramatic irony in it. But in The Last of Us Part 2, they try to do something that I hate! Reverse dramatic irony. It is the devil in disguise. Which, if you can't figure it out, what reverse dramatic irony is, it is when the characters know something important about the plot that the reader / player / viewer doesn't know. Most of the major plot points in this game are told in flashbacks. When you start out the game, you have so many questions, and the game doesn't give you answers. I hate this because it just leaves the player feeling absolutely confused. Like in the very first scene, that isn't like the prologue, where Jesse comes up to like Ellie's door and you have a conversation about Ellie, how Ellie kissed Dina. I immediately have 1,000 questions. Where am I? Where was I last night? Who is Dina? Who is Jesse? Where is Joel? And they don't explain any of what happens in the first scene until 20 hours into the game. It is so unbelievably stupid that I want to rip my hair out. So despite all that I have said, it isn't the worst story I have ever seen. So because of that, I will give it a reluctant 5 out of 10, even though I want to give it a negative 2,000 out of 10. Which, by my scale, is mediocre. But I don't feel comfortable giving it a rating any higher than that. Sorry for the people who liked the story. Maybe you're seeing something that I am not. But I just think it sucks. Okay, so that was pretty heated. But now, let's get into the replayability. The replayability of this game is not very good. Yes, the gameplay is really good, but at the end of the day, The Last of Us is a game series primarily focused on story. Even if you are one of the people who really like the story, it is a very heavy and sad story, which tends to make people not want to replay it. Then also all of those tedious infected levels that I talked about before could really turn people off to replaying the game. I know for one that I am probably never going to play this game again. Not probably, I am definitely never playing this game again. That is why I give the replayability of The Last of Us Part 2 a 4 out of 10. Needs a lot of improving, but again, replayability is only worth 15% of the final rating because it isn't that important. Okay, so art design. Just like the first game, the art design in this game is amazing. They did just a really good job on the characters and this whole like post-apocalyptic world. I've already talked about this a bunch in this video. 10 out of 10. Now, for the final criteria, graphics. The graphics in this game are absolutely amazing. Compared to a lot of the other games that came out in 2020, it is definitely on the upper end. I really like what they did with like the light texture and like the glare that you get with the sun. I thought that was really cool. Also, the characters just look like really amazing, and like how everything kind of flows with the game is really great. I don't think I have many complaints about the graphics of this game. It is very beautiful and definitely on par with 2020 standard, and is probably the best part of this game. 10 out of 10. Okay, now for the final rating. Just to recap, I gave gameplay an 8 out of 10, the story a 5 out of 10, the replayability a 4 out of 10, the art design a 10 out of 10, and the graphics also 10 out of 10. But unfortunately, there are more important things than art design and graphics, so my final overall rating for The Last of Us Part 2 is a 6.8 out of 10, which is just decent. Nothing more, nothing less. Honestly, the improved gameplay really carried this rating, and also the fact that I was very generous with that 5 out of 10 story rating. And I know a lot of people are going to hate me for saying this, but you know what? Screw you. Guess what, buddy? I know more than you. What are you going to do? Fight me? I could beat you in a fight. Now we are at what I thought was going to be a 1-for-1 copy of the first game, but to my surprise, it was actually not as bad as I thought. And that is The Last of Us Part 1. The story is exactly the same, but I probably would have been pissed off if they changed it. And yeah, the combat situations are almost all the same, but they improved the mechanics in a big way to make it more like The Last of Us Part 2. Okay, so now without further ado, let's get into the gameplay of the game. So when it comes to gameplay, I was both impressed and disappointed. Also, most of this review is going to be about the gameplay because that is literally the only thing different besides the graphics. Okay, it's better to end on a positive note, so let's get all the negative, icky stuff out of the way first. So first of all, I feel like they were kind of lazy with this game. There were so many new mechanics introduced in The Last of Us Part 2 that they could have like implemented into this game to make it so much better. Those mechanics include going prone and like dodging attacks. Both of these things were in The Last of Us Part 2, and I feel like they could have easily added both of these things without it affecting the levels all too much. Some of which they changed anyway. One thing that I liked about this game is that they added a lot of new areas to it to like, find supplies, supplements, scraps, upgrades, and collectibles. But they could have added more. They had a bunch of opportunities to add new areas where you could have used the mechanic where you have to shift through like a tight space or use a rope to climb to it or break a window to unlock a door, all of which were in The Last of Us Part 2 and made the game's gameplay just that much more interesting. Then also, I don't think that it would have been too hard to add some like tall grass to some of the levels so that you could hide in it just like the second game. All of these things could have been done to make the game better, but they didn't, and it just makes the game feel lazy. Enough with the negative, let's talk about the positive. They changed the HUD to look more like The Last of Us Part 2, which I am a big fan of because I think that it looks much cleaner than the original game and it's easier to navigate. Then also in general, the game just feels a lot smoother than before, than the original game. And then also probably noticed that I was using lock on aim in just like in The Last of Us Part 2 in this game, and that is because I'm bad at video games. But that wasn't an option in the original game, and there are like a ton more accessibility options besides that as well that make the game more fun for people that might be disabled in some way or another. Also, I talked about it earlier, but they did add some new areas that weren't in the original game that allow you to get more loot, which was one of the things that I complained about the original game. I felt like there just in the original game there just wasn't enough for you to get like the vast majority of the upgrades for yourself and your weapons, but they definitely fixed that in this game. I was way closer to getting all the upgrades, and I feel like if I explored maybe a little bit more, I definitely would have done it. On top of that, they added safes, just like The Last of Us Part 2, which again makes it so you can gain more loot. All of which makes the game so much better than the original. All of the levels are basically the same, besides a couple of infected levels where they added stalkers. Which I hate stalkers, but I liked it because it was kind of confusing how there weren't any in like stalkers in the first original game, but there were in the Left Behind DLC and in the second game, and they never really explained why there weren't any in the original game, but they did add them in this game, so that kind of makes up for it. And then also they added some new areas in the combat levels with like new enemies in them, so it wasn't exactly the same thing. But that is pretty much all I have to say about the gameplay. Besides those things that I listed, it was pretty much the same as the original, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing, but I definitely get a feeling that I wasted $70 that I am never getting back. But what are you going to do? Anyways, even though it was missing a lot of things from The Last of Us Part 2, which made the game very good, I am still going to give it a better score than The Last of Us Part 2 because I thought The Last of Us Part 2's mechanics deserved an 8.5 out of 10, but the overbearing, tedious levels made me give it an 8 out of 10. I don't feel like this game deserves an 8.5 out of 10 because it still feels very lazy. But since they did improve the gameplay, even if it was just a little, and the levels weren't as annoying and tedious, I give the gameplay of The Last of Us Part 1 an 8.25 out of 10. Pretty good. Okay, so the rest of these criteria are going to be very quick. The story literally did not change from the first game like at all. And like I said earlier, that's a good thing. But since I already talked about the story of this game earlier in this video, I'm just going to give it a rating 10 out of 10, same as the original. Okay, so now for replayability. I'm actually going to give the replayability of this game a higher score than I did the original for one plain reason. The gameplay was technically better. Now that I have this game, I am not going to replay the old one. But, God, I'm just burnt out of The Last of Us. I'm not going to lie. I just want to play any other game. Any other game. Replayability gets a 9.25 out of 10. Pretty much the same exact art design as the first game, which, again, I think is a good thing because if something is good, don't fuck with it. 10 out of 10. Okay, so now for the big thing that separates this game from the first game. The upgraded graphics. I have to say that the graphics of this game are very impressive. They made it look a lot more like The Last of Us Part 2, which I think was a great move. You could tell more about you could see the characters like facial expressions more, and you could tell how they were feeling. And other than that, it was just really pretty to look at. The sky, I was actually very impressed by the sky. It looked like hyper realistic, and it really just made the art design pop more than it did in the original game. Then it also sticks out compared to other games of this time. So for all of those reasons, I give the graphics a 10 out of 10, which is good because that is the whole reason they made this damn remake anyways. Okay, so this game was definitely an improvement from the first game and is probably objectively the best game in the series so far. So just to recap, I gave the gameplay an 8.25 out of 10, the story a 10 out of 10, the replayability a 9.25 out of 10, the art design a 10 out of 10, and the graphics also a 10 out of 10. Overall, a really good game with the highest rating so far out of all these reviews with a 9.19 out of 10. A really good game and objectively the best game in the franchise. But the real question to be had here is, do I think it's worth $70? No. Okay. If you already own the original game, then I don't think you really need to buy this one. Like maybe if it goes on sale, buy it, but overall it's pretty much the same experience. Pretty much. It is a better experience, but I don't think it's that much of a better experience that it's worth spending that much money. If you don't have the original game, though, I definitely suggest you buy this one over the original because it is overall a better experience. Second to last review on this list. And this one is probably going to be the shortest review of all of them. I could probably do it in under 2 minutes. Okay, time starts now. Okay, this DLC was extremely disappointing because unlike The Last of Us Part 1, they basically changed absolutely nothing about it from the original. The only thing that was different was the HUD that looked like The Last of Us Part 2. And it was a little more smooth. But that is just because it was newer. Anyways, with all of that said, my gameplay rating is only going to be a little higher than the original DLC at a 7.25 out of 10. I feel like they definitely could have done better. The story was the same boring, cringy shit as before, but still good, 9 out of 10. Replayability. This game is still a DLC, and I am more likely to replay the main game, 4 out of 10. Art design, pretty much the same as The Last of Us Part 1 and also pretty much the same as the original, 10 out of 10. Graphics, the one and only difference from the original the one and only thing different from the original, but it was still the same as the main game, 10 out of 10. Final rating, just to recap, gameplay is 7.25 out of 10. Story is 9 out of 10, replayability is 4 out of 10, art design is 10 out of 10, and graphics is also 10 out of 10, giving the Left Behind remake a 7.7 out of 10, which is slightly better than the original DLC, but not by much. It was pretty much the same game. Okay, now we are finally on our last item in this franchise, and it is the thing that inspired this whole video. The Last of Us TV show adaptation on HBO Max. Okay, so since this is a TV show and not a video game, I will obviously not be using the same criteria as before, so I will explain the criteria now, and I will still be rating each of the criteria out of 10, so here it is. First is storytelling/writing, which will be worth the most at 30%. The reason being that a movie can have like the best cinematography in the world and still have a shitty story, and I'll probably get bored of it. Whereas I can forgive a movie that has shitty cinematography and acting if it has a good story. Next is cinematography, which will be worth 20% of the final rating. Then acting, which will be worth also 20%. Then visual effects, which will be worth 15%. And finally, we have audio effects, which will also be worth 15%. So now, without further ado, let's talk about The Last of Us on HBO. Okay, so the story of this show is absolutely amazing. They managed not to stray too much from the source material while still making it different enough to stand out from the video games. Okay, there are a couple of things that I dislike about the story of the show that I'm going to just get out of the way before I talk about the good things. So first, they changed it for some reason in the show that the only way to get infected is by getting bit, where in the game you can get infected by either getting bit or breathing in spores. They said, like in an interview, that they changed it to make it more realistic, but the story itself is already extremely unrealistic, so why? Honestly. And it just makes it seem easier to survive. Also, they basically replace spores with the fact that if you step on any of like the cordyceps fungus, it sends like signals to the infected that you are there and they're going to come running for you. And I have a couple of problems with this. First, how the hell is this any more realistic than the fungus releasing spores in the air? And second, they introduced this in the second episode, And it happens in that episode. They step on some fungus and they all come a running. But it doesn't come up ever again for the rest of the season. They played it up as like this huge problem when in reality it was barely an inconvenience. Then the second thing is that they tried to explain how Ellie was immune, like why she was immune. And what they came up with was that her mom was bit while she was pregnant, and because of some science mumbo jumbo, I'm pretty sure half the words they used were made up. She is immune. In my personal opinion, they should have just left it a mystery because that is so fucking stupid. Because in this situation, pretty much anything that they come up with will sound completely absurd and stupid, which is what happened. Okay, so now that we got all of that negative out of the way, let me talk about the changes that I liked about the show. Well, actually, for the purpose of time, I'm not going to list all of the changes that I liked, but just my top three, because I know how much three is, because this video is already going to be too long as it is. Okay, so my third favorite change that they made to the story that differs from the video game is Joel's vulnerability. In the video game, Joel is almost like this unstoppable force that is practically like unkillable. And for the game, that is good because it makes the combat levels more believable. But in the show, Joel being like a little bit weaker adds more emotion and meaning to all of his decisions, especially later in the show. It also makes it so that his relationship with Ellie is more like interpersonal, and you become more attached to like their father-daughter like dynamic that they have. Now for my second favorite change that they made would be Henry and Sam's relationship. In the game, we don't really know who Henry and Sam are or why they are fleeing Pittsburgh. All we really know about them is that they are brothers and that they're looking for the Fireflies for some reason. But in the show, there is like this whole subplot of Henry like ratting out the leader of the Kansas City Revolution's brother, which in turn got the brother killed. Then there is the reason that he and then the reason that he did it, which was because his brother has leukemia and he needed the medicine from Fedra, so he had to rat out the brother. This strengthens Henry's relationship with Sam, and it also strengthens the reason why Joel respects him in the first place. Okay, now lastly, my personal favorite story change that they made was Bill and Frank. For people who haven't played the games, Frank is Bill's partner, but Joel and Tess don't even know who Frank is in the games. They just trade exclusively with Bill because Frank left Bill in the games. They also don't go out and say that Bill and Frank were like a romantic couple, but it is kind of inferred. Though I think that them showing the actual relationship between Bill and Frank leading up to their joint suicide was honestly beautifully done. It also adds to their relationship with Joel and Tess. I'm not usually one for romance, but I did enjoy this. The only thing that I miss from the game that they didn't have because of this is that Bill died before he met Ellie, and I really loved Ellie and Bill's whole like dynamic in the game. But I can overlook that. And there were a bunch more changes that they made that I liked, but these were the ones that stuck out the most to me. But because of the first two things, I don't think I can give it a straight up 10 out of 10, but I will make it as close as possible to that with a 9.75 out of 10. Really great story with only a couple of errors. So I don't think that I am qualified enough to go super deep into cinematography, but with my limited knowledge of the subject, I don't see any problems in this show. As far as I can tell, the cinematography is great. So what I am going to do is pick my favorite shot from each episode, say what I like about them, and then give it a rating. Okay, so here's my favorite shot from episode 1. it was actually really hard to pick one for this episode because I was debating on like five other shots. There were a lot of good shots in this episode. Anyways, I picked this one because I thought it was the most climactic and emotional. This shot is just like it's very beautifully done with the light only really illuminating Joel and Sarah. The rest of the background is pitch darkness or extremely out of focus. This puts like more emphasis on the emotions that these two characters are displaying. Now for episode 2, this was another one that I was debating on a couple of different shots on, but in the end I fell in love with this one. It's a very simple shot because it's just Ellie crossing a plank of wood between two different buildings with Joel and Tess watching. But the wide angle shot, making it so you can see all of the surroundings of a post-apocalyptic Boston, is just stunning. Okay, now for episode 3. I don't necessarily think this is the best shot of episode 3, but I do think it is a tad underrated. The way that it is focused outside, the way that it is like focused outside and you actually watch, and if you actually watch the scene, you can kind of see it here. It slowly transitions from like the outside being in focus as Joel and Ellie drive away from the town to the inside being in focus, where the inside of the bedroom where Bill and Frank are now laying at rest. I think that this shot just like adds to the emotion that you as a viewer are already feeling about Bill and Frank's like double suicide, because in the letter Bill wrote Joel that he said in the letter that Bill wrote Joel, he said that he left the window open so the house wouldn't stink of dead people. It's just kind of like really cinematically nice to see the that window that he was talking about. Okay, so episode 4 was probably the hardest episode to choose a shot for because cinematically this and story-wise this episode doesn't really stick out all too much. Anyways, I ended up choosing this shot because I love the wide angle. And again, the set design of this post-apocalyptic world is very beautiful in a way. Just with all the cars that have probably been there for like at least 20 years, gives the viewer insight on what people were going through when the world went to shit originally. Okay, so now for episode 5. Okay, so by now you're probably noticing a little bit of a trend. I am a sucker for a nice wide shot or like establishing shot. I think it's just like very cool seeing Joel and Ellie here being so small, surrounded by an open world. It kind of gives weight to the journey that they need to make. Because compared to everything else in this frame, Joel and Ellie are very tiny. And I don't know if this is the impression the director wanted to make, but whether or not it was on purpose, I think it still is pretty cool. Also, we have a little bit of low angle here, which also makes Ellie and Joel seem more strong and reliant, like survivors are supposed to be. Now for episode 6. I absolutely love this shot. This shot makes me feel like I'm watching a western because the silhouette shot on a horse is a very western movie trope. But lucky for HBO, I love westerns and I love silhouette shots. Just them on the horse as the sunset is it's just a very beautiful shot. Sorry, I don't really have any film language to use on this shot. It's just very visually appealing to me. Okay, now for episode 7. Okay, this might be my favorite shot in the entire show. All of the shops lighting up as Ellie is just staring at them from above makes this moment like feel magical. Again, in this shot, Ellie seems like really small, which I think is significant because this is her first time seeing anything like this, and I think the shot just perfectly captures the awe that Ellie must have been feeling during that moment. Okay, now for episode 8. This shot is amazing, and the main reason that it is amazing is Bella Ramsey. The expression on her face after what she had just experienced and the whole building burning down around her. I think that the fire in the background just adds to like the chaos of this moment in the story. Also, I think that the fire might also represent what Ellie is like feeling at that moment. She's covered in blood and everything is crashing down besides her because she had experienced something like truly traumatic. And spoiler alert, if you don't know what I'm talking about, she almost got raped in this scene. So with that knowledge, the shot makes a lot of sense. Okay, now for the last episode, I could have picked a specific shot, but instead I wanted to show you guys the sequence, which through a cinematography lens is just so captivating. And I'm just gonna let the sequence do the talking. So for me, so here it is. Okay, so showing all of that, again, like I said in the beginning, I saw no real flaws with the cinematography, and it is definitely not boring or basic, so I give the cinematography of The Last of Us a 10 out of 10. Okay, this review is getting way too long, so for the last three criteria, I'm gonna kind of like skim through them a little bit. Sorry. The acting in the show was very good. I think that both Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey did a very good job portraying Joel and Ellie. Actually, when I watched the first episode, I literally said out loud, "That's Joel!" when I saw Pedro Pascal playing as Joel for the first time, because he looked a lot like him. Bella Ramsey also did a very good job as well at capturing the emotion of the relationship between Joel and Ellie. Though I do feel like some of the side characters could have done a better job. Sorry for being so vague, but this video is getting way too long. The acting gets a 9 out of 10. The visual effects, like explosions and gunshots in the show, are very good. Basically what you would expect with their budget and modern technology. But there is one problem. This giraffe looks so fake that when I saw it for the first time, I laughed. Like, knowing that the live action like Lion King movie exists, this is like a fucking joke. Anyways, that is all I had to say. 8.5 out of 10. Okay, the sound effects in this show are very good. Way better than the visual effects, especially in that sequence that I showed you back in the cinematography section. Then I think they just make a very good use of like diegetic sounds to create all sorts of different like atmospheres. Also, the soundtrack is just amazing. I have no problems with it whatsoever, just like the video game. 10 out of 10. Okay, so like I said, I will be normally reviewing exclusively video games, so take this final rating with a grain of salt. Storytelling and writing got a 9.75 out of 10. Cinematography got a 10 out of 10. Acting got a 9 out of 10. Visual effects got an 8.5 out of 10. And finally, sound effects and the soundtrack got a 10 out of 10. Giving The Last of Us HBO show a final rating of 9.5 out of 10, which is a really good rating. It's actually the highest rating so far out of everything in this franchise. And this actually explains a lot because I've always felt like The Last of Us would have done better as a TV show or movie than a video game. So it's only fitting that the show would get the highest score in this video. Okay, I am so done with this fucking game series. I swear to God, I am not touching a Last of Us game maybe until season 2 of the show comes out. And maybe not even then. Anyways, now it is time for the final ranking of the series as a whole, which is going to be the average of all the rankings combined. Every single game and the show will all be worth the same towards the final ranking. So I'm just going to recap what the rank that each item received was as a final ranking. So The Last of Us got an 8.7 out of 10. The Last of Us Left Behind got a 7.45 out of 10. The Last of Us Part 2 got a 6.8 out of 10. The Last of Us Part 1 got a 9.19 out of 10. The Last of Us show got a 9.5 out of 10. And that gives The Last of Us series a final rating of, drumroll please, a 8.22 out of 10, which is good. That is actually how I would describe The Last of Us as a whole. Perfectly good. Okay, if you made it all the way to the end of the video, honestly, brav fucking O, because it was a long one. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, please consider liking the video, and if you want even more game reviews and other gaming content, please subscribe to my channel. Okay. Bye.